Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 535 through 537, which will cover manga chapters 616 through 618. And chaos begins to ensue as Hody and Decken begin to mobilize their plans. So, synopsis. The Straw Hats find themselves in a precarious situation as they're being implicated for crimes left and right by the people of the Fishman Island. And while Hody and Vanderdecken's combined forces begin to enact their plan to usurp King Neptune and take over Ryugu Palace, the Straw Hats must find a way to figure out how to clear their names as well as stay out of trouble. Okay, so differences. There are quite a few actually in these three episodes. So first off, a couple small things. There is a brief scene of Shirahoshi and Luffy seeing a cloud shaped like a raccoon, which was added in the anime. And then there's also a mini flashback of Arlong saving Hody and his crew as kids. Now, this is alluded to in the manga, but it's never actually shown. Then there's the joke that Brook makes upon hearing the name Arlong and never having eaten one, and Usopp's subsequent scolding of him is in the manga, but we don't actually see it as the panel is actually focused on Nami's face, while the anime actually has some screen time available to actually show this. So we just get to see the speech bubble in the manga, but we actually get to see this whole interaction in the anime. Another change is there's a scene where after Zoro gets Neptune free, it cuts back to Sunny, which is not in the manga. In the manga, it actually cuts to Luffy coming across Chopper, Sanji, and Hachi. And one thing about this scene I found hilarious is that when we cut back to the Sunny and Frankie is inspecting it, he's seen pushing the swing on the main deck and going, "Good, it looks like nothing's been broken," as if it would be that hard to fix the swing of all things. And I know he's talking about the ship in its entirety, but I just find it funny him saying this particular line while he's inspecting the swing. It's just like, it's not like that it's going to be that hard to fix a swing set. But, obviously the spirit of the line is that he's talking about the ship in its entirety. In the anime, we also get a few more action beats of Zoro fighting Hody, whereas in the manga, the next time we actually see Zoro, he's already slashed and defeated Hody without actually having seen anything that happens in between. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in the actual episode talk, but yeah, I didn't really like this change, to be honest. I understand why they had to do it. They wanted to increase the time so that it would fit the episode and kind of draw out a little bit more. And this is one of the biggest things about post-time skip One Piece is that they add a lot of these like unnecessary scenes to try and draw out time. And it just ruins the pacing, to be quite honest. There are also a couple added lines in the anime. Like one of my favorite added dialogue is where Shirahoshi sees Chopper for the first time. She mentions how he looks exactly like a raccoon from the encyclopedias that she's seen, which I find hilarious because Chopper's constantly trying to correct people and telling him he's a reindeer and not a raccoon. And then finally, in the manga, when Zoro defeats Hody, it's never stated what move he uses, but it's pretty obvious which one it is. But in the anime, they opt to have him actually think in his inner thoughts the name of the move, Itoryu Iai Shishonson, aka the one sword style draw Death Lion song. And so, yeah, I wonder if this is for like maybe the younger audiences who watch the anime who maybe not be able to pick up what move he's using, so they just actually have him say it in his head, which is not a really big deal or anything, but it's interesting that Oda opted not to say it in the manga, but the Toei animators and directors, they felt that he should say it. Alrighty, so on to the episodes themselves, and first of all, I can't stop laughing at seeing Megalo put in this situation with Shirahoshi crammed into him. He looks so uncomfortable and he's legit struggling. Like you can especially tell in the eyes. I love how Oda and Toei decided to draw Megalo's eyes because he's always like tearing up and it's so hard. But he's being such a trooper to bring so much happiness and joy to Shirahoshi. It gets even funnier as the episode progresses when, in a later scene, Megalo is just drenched in sweat from the effort of concealing Shirahoshi, and Luffy has the audacity to ask if he's not feeling well. Like, no crap, he's not feeling well. Then, of course, we'll later see Neptune theorizing how Brook could have seen Luffy and Megalo, but not Shirahoshi. And he accurately surmises that Shirahoshi could have been hidden inside Megalo, with the entire Ammonite guards just laughing it off, saying that even if someone came up with such an idea, no one would be stupid enough to actually employ it. And then it smash cuts to Luffy's nostrils where he sneezes because someone is talking about him, which is that age-old Japanese superstition that you will sneeze if someone's talking about you. And we also get a call back to how Luffy never gets sick, which we learned all the way back just before arriving at Drum when they were taking care of the sick Nami. Meanwhile, Robin gets a little bit more screen time finally as she's going about looking for the poneglyphs and clues to the Void Century. This scene is actually slightly expanded upon in the anime, as in the manga it begins after we see a bunch of soldiers already downed in front of the bus station. I do like the little added dialogue that she has with the soldiers where, upon hearing the charges that are placed on the Straw Hats, and one of those based on a precognition, Robin being a scholar thinks basing something as serious as a criminal accusation on that to be absurd, which completely fits her character and kind of reminds me of Nolan and his response to the Shandians' superstitious beliefs when they were sacrificing their people to a giant snake. In a fun scene, we finally get a proper introduction to Tom's brother, Den. And if you ever wondered what Wapol and Foxy sounds like if they were to talk normal, Den would be it, because they all share the same voice actor, being Shibata. Except for Den, he's not screaming his lines in an exaggerated fashion. And I love that despite them not looking alike, he still has the same speech quirk that Tom had, where when he wants to emphasize something, he'll include that trademark don as an adjective or an adverb describing something. Another interesting bit of lore and world building he drops is a bit more of a detailed look at how genetics work among mer people and fish people. I think the most interesting piece of info we get is not so much the inner workings of the genetics with how genes are passed down to make such varied offspring, but more so the idea that fish people have a difficult time understanding why humans discriminate based on looks, which is honestly a fair critique of not just One Piece, but real life humans. And at the same time, we've seen how there is a bit of segregation among the fish people and mer people, since we see there is a Fishman district where the unsavory go, but we're beginning to see how that has kind of been influenced and corrupted by Arlong and Hody's ideals over the years. Then there's also an exchange between Den and Frankie that's always amusing, where he goes to surmise that Frankie's ancestors must have been robots, and Frankie is genuinely offended by this. And I find it really telling that Frankie prefers to be referred to as a pervert over a robot, which I feel like if you dig a little deeper could mean that despite being a crazy-looking cyborg, that he still values his humanity and kind of takes exception to being considered a robot. And so he likes the pervy aspect of him more so than the robot aspect of him. I also like that Den is not only comforted and proud of his brother's life and pupil. I just like that, I really like that scene. It makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside that Den, not only, he did lose his dear brother, but at least his legacy is being continued on with Frankie and Iceberg. It's at this point we realize that now that Frankie is at the Sea Forest, along with Jinbei, who's waiting for Luffy, as it so happens that Robin is also headed there to search for poneglyphs, we now realize that there are several people of the Straw Hat crew all converging on the Sea Forest, and we'll later on see that Nami is also headed there as well. Now we get to our first main confrontation of the arc as Hody and Vanderdecken make their way into the palace, and you kind of feel awful for Neptune as he's desperately trying to save his daughter, and you're kind of actually, well, at least for me, I don't know how other people really felt about this, but for me, I'm actually pretty frustrated with Zoro and the Straw Hats for not seeing what the situation that they're in. At least that's kind of, how I felt reading and watching this for the first time. And to be honest, I still get frustrated rewatching this, even though I know the outcome is good. While Dekken flies off to chase Shirahoshi, we then witness to what's referred to as a moment of destiny or destined reunion between the new Fishman Pirates and the Straw Hat Pirates, particularly Hody coming face to face with Nami as he recounts how they came to look up to Arlong and follow in his footsteps to carry on his will. And this is an interesting twist on the staple theme of inherited will that's surprisingly we have yet to actually see up till now. That's the idea that the inherited will of villains. And not, up till now, we've seen this concept play out as a good and uplifting concept where we see our heroes and other characters on the good side carry on the wills of people. But this is one where we see the inherited will of the bad guys. And I love this scene that follows because it's so on point for every character. Nami is clearly having a slight PTSD moment, remembering the horrible things that happened to her, while Zoro and Usopp are aware of what this means to Nami and react appropriately, showing some surprise and concern, while Brook's reaction is funny as he pretends to also be shocked at Arlong's mention, but obviously he has no idea who anyone is and what they're talking about, and so he jokes about it, saying he's never eaten an Arlong, which I find funny, and also don't really fault him at all for this, as insensitive as it is, given Nami's emotional state right now. But what I love is that Usopp, immediately caring for Nami and knowing how painful this is for her, kicks Brook and tells him to just shut up. And I thought that was a great sort of moment, like character moment, just seeing the dynamic between the different levels of the crew, because obviously Usopp and Zoro are fully aware of what Nami's been through and what this means to her, while Brook, not having been at Arlong Park and no one having told him about this, it's a very understandable reaction considering Brook's sort of unhinged comedic nature. But Usopp, also being very mindful of that, tells him to just shut up, which I like. And this kind of interaction and dialogue, while a little exaggerated, also feels so real and genuine, which is why I like it so much. It's exactly how you'd react if someone innocently is making light of someone's pain accidentally. Of course, this isn't Brook's fault. He has no idea, but Usopp, being a good friend, knows he needs to shut Brook up fast so as to not cause Nami any more pain than she's already going through at this moment, hearing that name, and that there are still people trying to carry on that horrible legacy. Hody, knowing the weakness of humans, being that they can't breathe or fight well underwater, decides to crush the exterior walls with his shark grip, and his underlings make a point to mention that he's not using the energy steroids yet, and he's seemingly displaying even more power than Arlong did, and along with using the water throwing move, the shark arrows that devastated Zoro and Sanji so much back at Arlong Park. But not only that, his design is also kind of similar to Arlong as well, with the colorful Hawaiian-style shirt and the shorts, as well as a hat. Although he's wearing kind of like one of those Newsies flat cap hats instead of the Russian Ushanka hat that Arlong wore. In addition, like Arlong, he's got a like long body length type weapon, but unlike the Nokogiri saw blade that Arlong had, Hody has a trident. Despite their like similarities, you can't quite shake the thought that Hody is kind of a cheap imitation of Arlong, and that's one thing some fans actually complain about when it comes to this arc, because they see Hody as just sort of a cheap fat Arlong imitation, and they use that as a criticism against Hody. I'm not going to pretend to be a huge fan of Hody, and there are plenty of things to complain about when it comes to him. But this is, I think, actually by design on Oda's part, to sort of evoke that nagging feeling that he's supposed to be Arlong, but kind of a cheap knockoff, right down to the fact that it almost seems like he's trying too hard to be like Arlong, right down to the addition of the ridiculous and unnecessary foxskin scarf that he also wears underwater for reasons. And the reason for this, as we see here, is that Hody has no real ideals or values to back his hate up. For all of Arlong's terrible faults, Arlong has a good reason for hating humans, which will get fleshed out even more in the coming episodes. But to avoid spoilers, I won't go too much further into that. But even in just what we've seen Arlong, he cares for his fisherman brethren and legit cares for his crew, and just fishermen in general. We see in Arlong Park how distraught he became when Zoro cut up everyone, and when he learns of Chu and Hachi and Kurobi's defeats, that's when he really turns it on and just starts wailing on Sanji and Zoro. But what does Hody do when Zoro attacks him with the Yakodori move? His immediate go-to is to take one of his crew and use them as a fisherman's shield. And so you can see that Hody isn't kind of an empty shell imitating Arlong, and only driven solely by hate for hate's sake. And I do like that Oda somehow manages to weave that into his character design too, in sort of the cheap knockoff way that he portrays him. Now, on the flip side, despite being shown to seemingly be stronger than Arlong, showing us that these new Fishman Pirates and Hody are a formidable threat that may even surpass Arlong, what does Oda do? He uses this revelation to show just how stupidly stronger the Straw Hats, and in this case Zoro, has become. The shark arrow attack that once nearly took out Zoro and Sanji, this time Zoro easily deflects them with the handle of the Wado Ichimonji like it's nothing. And once the palace gets completely flooded, Zoro makes quick work of Hody in one hit while underwater at no less. Just kind of reinforcing how much of a cheap imitation Hody is compared to Arlong as a threat that he can't even beat Zoro on his own turf in underwater, and the only way now going forward that he could even be a credible threat to Luffy is to take performance-enhancing drugs. And so yeah, I do like that sort of visual storytelling in terms of how much stronger the Straw Hats have become in this situation. But moving on from Hody, in the next moment, I can't really put into words that well, but I freaking love when Zoro tells Usopp and Brook to free the hostages after they fail to honor their end of the bargain to keep the hostages safe. And this is so badass for some reason. Like, I think it partly has to do with the fact that I personally felt so frustrated with Zoro earlier for being just kind of stubborn in how he was handling the hostage situation with Fukaboshi and everything. Although you could still argue he probably shouldn't have taken the hostages in the first place, but he ultimately does the right thing. Neptune, for his part too, shows how good of a king he is and shields as many of his Ammonites from Hody as he can with his own body. And Oda is always so good at creating great characters and moments that build those characters up. Oh, I love these scenes. In the anime, we get to see some more fighting between Zoro and Hody, but this is an addition that I feel kind of takes away a bit from the intended spirit of the manga, as it kind of makes Zoro struggle a little bit against Hody, whereas in the manga, it cuts away as soon as Zoro dives into the water and makes us think that Zoro is in a really bad situation being underwater, holding his breath while fighting the main villain of the arc by himself, which, you know, we've been kind of conditioned to believe that they're in a really disadvantageous position based on Arlong Park, as well as Sabodi, in terms of our human heroes fighting a fishman underwater. But in the manga, to all our shock and surprise, the next time we see him at the end of the following chapter, we see Zoro's in complete command of the situation by one-shotting Hody with Shish Son Son. And so for the anime to show us Zoro even slightly struggling kind of takes away from that moment of just how badass he's become to be able to fight basically an Arlong equivalent underwater like it was nothing. Now, when going back to the Coral Hills to catch up with Luffy and Shirahoshi, they come across Hachi, Chopper, and Sanji. But at this point, man, poor Megalo, he can't hold Shirahoshi in any longer and barbs her up. And this shark is the real MVP of this arc, in my opinion. It's always been one of my favorite things about the Fishman Island arc. Also, the absolute desperation in Chopper's voice to stop Sanji from seeing Shirahoshi is incredible voice acting from Ikue Otani. Like, that exchange between the two about how Sanji is willing to die if it means achieving his dream, and Chopper screaming at him, wasn't your dream the all blue? It's so funny. And Sanji, thankfully, instead of doing his nosebleed bit, he just turns to stone, which I much rather prefer, which obviously plays on the whole Medusa and the Boa Hancock trope, but I prefer the stone thing to Sanji's nose bleeding. It's at this point Vanderdecken eventually catches up to them and proposes to Shirahoshi yet again, to which she of course rejects. But her rationale is the most benign of the myriad of reasons to reject him, which the other citizens are also in agreement with, the shock that of all the reasons, she just won't marry him because he's not her type. And never mind the unhinged craziness or the violent tendencies, the grossly inappropriate age difference, and the fact that he's basically been stalking and attempting to murder her for 10 years. But it's all because he's not her type. Also, when you see the reaction shot of the fish people shocked at Shirahoshi's ridiculous reason for not wanting to marry Dekken, right as it pans, you can see Panda Man among them as the camera pans are at around the 12-minute 40-second mark in the Crunchyroll stream. Like, he's just off to the left, also with his arms up, screaming because he's so shocked. The next little mini action sequence is pretty cool for a couple reasons. Now, Luffy, in order to protect Shirahoshi, unleashes his Conqueror's Haki to knock out everyone. And I have to say, I don't think I will ever tire of seeing Luffy use his Conqueror's Haki to knock people out en masse. And to defeat Vanderdecken, we get to see the Gear 2nd version of a move that we haven't seen in a very long time, which is the Gomu Gomu no Jet Hammer. And this is the same move he uses to defeat Don Krieg, where at the time he was also bound by Krieg's net and was forced to use his feet and legs. The original move was called Gomu Gomu no Ozuchi, or Great Mallet, but since it's been enhanced with Gear 2nd, it's been upgraded to a full-fledged hammer, which I find cool. All this being yet more mirror callbacks to pre-time skip stuff, even down to similar framing of the shot. But in the anime, it is reversed. So you see him slam Dekken down on the right side of the screen. However, in the manga, the shot is actually nearly identical. They are both slammed down to the left of the screen. Now, in another scene following this, there is a conversation between Nami and Kami that really start to get at the heart of this arc's themes and why Jinbei warns Luffy from fighting Hody. It's not so much of a warning of danger, as Jinbei probably knows that Luffy is plenty capable of taking on Hody, but it's more so for the public perception of the Straw Hats and humans in general that would be tarnished if Luffy decides to engage. Throughout the arc so far, we've seen just how easily swayed the public opinion of the crew and humans are, kind of due to the fact that the negative reception of humans have built up over hundreds of years of oppression and violence towards Fishman Island and fish and merfolk alike. If Luffy comes in and just beats the crap out of Hody, it'll just be another example of humans coming from the surface to inflict their will on Fishman Island. Even if it's not the case, people still have been so conditioned to that they will jump to that conclusion, the negative conclusion, whether that is true or not. Jinbei, having spent a lot of time on the surface, knows that there are humans that are good, and it seems like he would want to not make the Fishman and human relations any worse, which is why he warns Luffy not to engage, because he knows what it's going to look like. And Hachi also seems to realize this as well, which is why he keeps quiet about who attacked him, so as to not provoke the Straw Hats to seek retribution on his behalf. Nami, of course, being the one of the sharpest crew members, immediately reasons this out and has Kami get her out of the palace so that she can confirm with Jinbei, as well as to probably kind of reconcile how someone that Luffy considers a friend and how many people like Kami consider to be a good person also be the same man that unleashed Arlong on the East Blue and her home. And I remember during the first read-through of this arc, I was on the edge of my seat waiting to see what their first interaction would be like, what Jinbei and Nami would say to each other. And unfortunately, we'll have to wait a little bit longer before we get to that whole interaction. But trust me, it doesn't disappoint. It's one of my favorite moments in the series, seeing this sort of conversation between Jinbei and Nami. But yeah, in closing, the arc is finally past the first act setup and sort of all the ridiculous Sanji stuff for the most part. And this is where the arc really begins to actually get good, as many of the parties converge on the Sea Forest, where we begin to kind of get a lot of the context around the complicated and tragic history of Fishman Island. And I can't wait to talk about it, because it is so densely packed and there's so much to talk about. And not only is it important to Fishman Island, but there's a lot that actually has a lot of impact on past events and future events that I really like. But that's it for this episode. If you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. It really helps me out. And yeah, we just recently passed, I think, 300 followers, which is pretty awesome. So thank you very much. And yeah, check out my Instagram and X account or Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast for updates on when I post new episodes, or to see pictures of my manga collection. No spoiler section this week, but as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye!